அனைவருக்கும் இனிய மாலை வணக்கம். ரோஜா முத்தையா ஆராய்ச்சி நூலகம் தொடர்ந்து நடத்தி வரும் ஆனந்தகிருஷ்ணன் அறக்கட்டளை சொற்பொழிவிற்கு உங்கள் அனைவரையும் அன்போடு வரவேற்கிறோம். தமிழ்நாட்டில் பல்வேறு கல்வி சார்ந்த செயல்பாடுகளை முன்னெடுத்த கல்வியாளர் ஆனந்தகிருஷ்ணன் நூலகத்தின் அறங்காவலர்கள் ஒருவராகவும் செயல்பட்டவர். அவர் அளித்த நிதியின் அடிப்படையில் உருவாக்கப்பட்ட இந்த அறக்கட்டளை சொற்பொழிவு தொடர்ந்து ஒவ்வொரு மாதமும் நிகழ்ந்து வருகிறது. இந்த அறக்கட்டளை சொற்பொழிவிற்கு தமிழ்நாடு மட்டுமல்லாமல் இந்தியாவிலிருந்து வெளியிலிருந்து பல ஆளுமைகள் தொடர்ந்து பல்வேறு சொற்பொழிவுகளை நிகழ்த்தி வந்துள்ளனர். அந்த வகையில் இன்று நம்முடன் பேச வந்திருப்பவர் முனைவர் வி ராஜேஷ் அவர்கள். அவர்களை ரோஜா முத்தியா ஆராய்ச்சி நூலகம் சார்பாக வரவேற்பதில் மகிழ்ச்சி அடைகிறோம். முனைவர் வி ராஜேஷ் அவர்கள் சென்னை ஐஐடியில் முனைவர் பட்டம் பெற்றவர். தற்போது IISER மொகாலியில் மனிதவியல் மற்றும் சமூக அறிவியல் துறையில் இணை பேராசிரியராக பணியாற்றி வருகிறார். அவரோட ஐஐடியில் பிஹெச்டி பண்ணும் பொழுது ரொம்ப முக்கியமான ஒரு ஆய்வு பண்ணாரு. அதை புத்தகமா திரும்ப மேனுஸ்கிரிப்ட் மெமரி அண்ட் ஹிஸ்டரி கிளாசிக்கல் தமிழ் லிட்ரேச்சர் இன் கலோனியல் இந்தியா அப்படிங்கிற இதுல வெளியிட்டிருக்காரு. அது ஒரு முக்கியமான ஒரு நூலாகும். அது இல்லாம ப்ராக்ரஸிசம் அப்படின்னு சொல்ற அது சம்பந்தமா தொடர்ந்து ஆய்வு செஞ்சுட்டு வராரு. அதனோட தொடர்ச்சியா இன்னைக்கு சுப்பிரமணிய பாரதி அண்ட் ப்ராக்ரஸிவ் லிட்டரரி மேகசின்ஸ் இன் தமிழ்நாடு 1950 to 1970 என்ற தலைப்புல நம்ம கிட்ட உரையாற்ற இருக்காரு. அவரை உரையாற்ற அழைக்கிறோம். ப்ளீஸ்.
Good evening, everyone. Vanakkam. I would like to first thank Dr. Sundar, Director, RMRL, Mr. Dhanabal, Mr. Subbu, for giving me an opportunity to share my research work with the audience here. I'm very nostalgic because this library I have used extensively during my PhD work. I used to be a regular visitor to RMRL during my PhD days at the IIT Madras. So we used to have discussions in the library back then, and so I feel very nostalgic, and I'm grateful to the director and staff at RMRL for giving me an opportunity to share my work here. The topic of my presentation today is Subramania Bharati and progressive literary magazines in Tamil Nadu 1950 to 1970. To give a context to what I'm going to speak, this is part of a new research that I started some years ago on tracing the history of literary progressivism in Tamil Nadu. So I took a sabbatical break last year from my institution, ISER Mohali, and was affiliated at the Madras Institute of Development Studies, where I carried out a part of this research. In fact, I started reading about Bharati and the reception of Subramania Bharati by the progressive critics in the months of August and September last year. And what I'm going to present today is actually a spillover of that work. So whatever I did last year was published as a working paper of MIDS. I have that with me. And that working paper is titled Reading Subramania Bharati Under Progressive Eye, Literary Criticism and the Cultural Left in Tamil Nadu. So it was back then that I started also reading some of the progressive literary magazines and examined how Bharati was covered in those magazines from 1950 to 1970. So that's the context of my intervention here. But before I get into the topic, I would like to issue few clarifications and also regarding definitions and also about the topic. The one thing that I would like to clarify is that Bharati was covered extensively in the magazines and other publications during the 20th century in Tamil Nadu. So I'm not claiming any exception here. Bharati was received even before, this progressive strand was felt in the literary sphere in Tamil Nadu from 1940s onwards. The Manikodi group of writers wrote on Bharati, examined the literary merits of Bharati in the magazine. Uh, so even after this phase, that is the terminal phase, 1940s, Bharati continued to continued to be researched and talked about extensively. So there's nothing exception. But what I am trying to do here is that my intention is to look at only the progressive magazines and the pages of the progressive magazines to see the place of Subramania Bharati. That is one clarification I wish to make at the beginning. The second is about the definition, that is progressivism, that I deployed here in the title of my talk. The idea of progressivism in literature is, in the cultural sphere more broadly, is a product of certain developments during the interwar years. In 1936, at Lucknow, the All India Progressive Writers Association was formed, and the first conference of the All India Progressive Writers Association happened in 1936 under the presidency of the famous Hindi writer Premchand. And as a result of which there was an impact felt in different regional languages of India. There have been a lot of works, academic works examining the impact of progressivism in Urdu literature, Bangla literature, and so on. But there are very less. In fact, I'm not able to recollect any of the work in the Tamil context. So that actually was a puzzle for me initially when I thought of researching on this area, that why is there a lack of adequate research on examining the history of literary progressivism in Tamil Nadu. In fact, one reason is that the organizational turn in the in the literary progressivism happens in Tamil Nadu only in the early 1960s, when Jeevanandam forms Kalailakya Perumandram in Coimbatore. But before that, there were attempts made by writers to form an association of progressive writers in Tamil Nadu without much success. It did not endure. So this late organizational turn in the literary progressivism in Tamil Nadu perhaps is also one reason why there has not been academic attempts to understand the history of this movement. But having said that, there were, attempts made before 1960s by individual writers and magazines started by Tamil scholars, where conscious attempts were made to domesticate and produce a new domesticate, the idea of progressivism in the Tamil context, the idea of Murpokuvadam. What I mean in the Tamil context is this idea of Murpok and Murpok Ilakyam. That's started from 1940s onwards, and developed in the course of time. As a result of which, we have also uh, magazines, literary magazines being published in the late 1940s, 1950s, and 60s, and so on. That with this ideological, left ideological leaning. So, in a broader sense, my talk is about the story of the cultural left in Tamil Nadu and the engagement of the cultural left with Subramania Bharati. And I must say that left displayed enormous enthusiasm in studying Bharati and his works. And I think it is important to also examine critically the works of these, scholars from the cultural left. Uh, at the same time, I would like to say that I am quite aware of the critical works on Bharati. When I say that left was enthusiastic of the Bharati, I also, there are also critical aspects that need to be presented. And this enthusiasm that left displayed on Bharati is also based on a certain selective reading of Bharati. I am equally aware of the critical response of, a critical reception of Bharati in 1930s, 40s, and 50s, especially the Periyarist critique of Bharati, beginning with the Periyar's own writings on Bharati, and then within the Periyar movement, critical reception of Bharati is very much, present. I'm equally aware of the contemporary Dalit critique of Subramania Bharati. Having said that, my project and my research focus on the left reception of Bharati. So I am going to present the story of how the literary magazines inspired by this ideology of progressivism uh, portrayed Bharati in their pages, and I am going to focus majorly on two magazines today in my talk. That is Santi, a magazine, a literary magazine, a monthly started by the Tamil writer Thomusi Ragunathan or TMC Ragunathan from Tirunelveli in December 1954, and Saraswati magazine, a literary magazine started by Vijay Bhaskaran in May 1955. Majorly, my talk will be on these two magazines and how these two magazines covered Bharati. Although I also intend to include the other magazine Thamarai that was started by Jiva in late 1958 as part of the official literary magazine of the Communist Party of India in Tamil Nadu. I will not deal with that much in my present talk. So in other words, what I'm going to do is to focus on these two progressive literary magazines, Santi and Saraswati, that were published in 1954 and then 1955. While Santi, did not last long beyond 1.5 years, but whereas the Saraswati continued to be published till early 1960s. So I'm going to do a broad survey of these magazines and how they looked at Subramania Bharati in their publications. Now, before I get into this, I would like to talk a little bit about the nature of the magazines and the importance of studying these magazines for the literary and the intellectual history. Here, I would like to quote from one of the well-known Tamil writers and Tamil scholar who had long history of a long experience of literary journalism, named Kannan. This translation is mine, and I have derived this quote from his book, Kannan Katturegal, that came out in 2004. And that essay in this book, it's called Tarkala Ilakkiyatthirku Sittridhalகளின் பங்களிப்பு, the contribution of little magazines to the contemporary literature. Let me quote what Vallikannan says. The little magazines are powerful instruments. It offers space for new kinds of writing and novel experiments. They help identify potential and skillful artists. They assist enormously in the growth of talented writers. By publishing intellectually stimulating ideas, constructive opinions, and research works that aid in the growth of intellect, little magazines help in the development of literature and art. As a consequence, the little magazines also improve the quality of readers. The magazines founded on principles and ideals are a source of pride for language and literature. So here is a an expression from one of the Tamil scholars who had a long experience in the world of literary journalism, underscoring the importance of studying the Sirupatrikai or Sitridhargal, right, for the literary history. The other important work that Kannan wrote, which I recommend, is Tamil Sirupatrikaigal. In fact, my next, quote is from that. Little magazines in Tamil. Valikannan says, I quote, literary enthusiasts and cultured readers would know very well what is meant by the little magazines. And then he goes on to list the characteristic features of little magazines. What are the features? So the little magazines are opposed to populist, capital intensive, business oriented, and big organizational nature. They are not, published for mass consumption. Secondly, they have a commitment to ideals and principles. The little magazines have commitment to ideals and principles. They are open to experimentation. They welcome and encourage newness and novelties. They identify and encourage talent. And these little magazines are based on the charisma of individuals or like minded people. And finally, they are subscription centered. So these are the features of little magazines according to Valikannan. I called out this, features that he describes from his, wonderful book, Tamil Sirupatrikaigal, published in 2004, a collection of essays that was originally serialized earlier in the earlier magazine, a literary magazine. Now, what are the potentialities of periodicals and magazines for literary history? I would like to cite two recent works that tried to use these magazines to construct or write a new kind of literary and intellectual histories. One is by Pritamani. Her book is titled The Idea of Indian Literature, Gender, Genre, and Comparative Method, published by Permanent Black in 2023. Preeta Mani's book adopts a comparative literature method to examine the expressions of short story in Hindi and Tamil and present 10 theses on the idea of Indian literature. The book does a close and innovative reading of short story writers in two important Tamil little magazines, Manikodi and Eluthu. So Pritamani does, a close reading of the short story and presents innovatively the idea of, the idea of Indian literature that was emerging, right, from these authors. The other work, it's a new kind of, literary history, I would say. Second, I would like to cite this work by scholar Samarpita Mitra, whose work Periodicals, Readers and the Making of a Modern Literary Culture, Bengal at the Turn of 20th Century, published by Brill in 2020. Samarpita Mitra's book explores themes such as the material culture of literary periodicals, debates over obscenity and propriety, formation of alternative readerships among middle class Bengali Muslims and women, and the interface between the literary sphere and the political life of the nation. So, by looking into the histories of periodicals closely, there is a possibility for a new kind of literary and cultural history and intellectual history. So, in the Tamil context, this idea of progressivism or Murpokuvadam was felt from 1940s onwards. In the post 1940s, late 1940s, in the Tamil context, attempts were made to form an organization of progressive writers and publish progressive literary magazines. In 1950s, three important magazines were published. Santi in 1954, as I said, Saraswati 1955, and Thamarai in 1958. Um, uh, Published from the progressive camp. Among the three, Thamarai was published as an official literary magazine of the CPI. As Vallikannan pointed out, these magazines occupied a liminal space between the business-oriented publications and the little magazines. In fact, Vallikannan says that the first little magazine or Sirupatrikai, in a true sense, of a definition, was the one edited by the short story writer C.S. Chellappa as Eluthu. But having said that, he devotes a considerable section in his book Tamil Sirupatrikaigal talking about the earlier attempts under the broader umbrella of the forerunners, right? Where he talks about many other magazines before Eluthu, including Santi, Saraswati, and so on. But what he notes is that although, in a definitional sense, the magazines like Santi, Saraswati do not come under the Sirupatrikai, but nevertheless, given the function and the quality involved, they can be, considered as a little magazine, right? In Tamil, in other words, these magazines occupied a liminal space between the business-oriented publications and the little magazines. In quality and functioning, they resembled little magazines, while at the same, they made efforts to create a market through a network of distributors and agents. All right. So this is insofar as the little magazines as a medium is concerned. My talk is about the coverage of Bharati, Subramania Bharati, or the reception of Bharati by these magazines. And that takes me to the story of the afterlife of Bharati in Tamil Nadu. One of the books that inspired me to look into this theme is the one published by Sivathambi and Marx in Tamil, called Bharati Maraivu Mudal Mahakavi Varai. Bharati from his death to the great poet in 1982. One of the critical works that dealt with the afterlife of Bharati in Tamil intellectual tradition. Now, what the authors do in this book is that they try to examine the story of the making of Mahakavi, right? Noting that the making of Mahakavi is a product of history, they try to, present the story in three stages, right? The stage one is from 1921 to 1935, in which Bharati's songs were tied to the nationalist movement in Tamil Nadu in the aftermath of the non-cooperation movement. The imposition of the ban by the colonial government on Bharati's poems in 1928 and the follow-up debate in the Madras Legislative Assembly sparked interest in Bharati. So this was the first stage of reception of Bharati, right? The second stage, from there we move on to the second stage from 1936 to 1944. Bharati's compositions were debated by the literary critics in Tamil Nadu, and here the Manikodi magazine and the Manikodi writers played an important role in recognizing and debating the literary merits of Bharati's compositions. Founding of Manikodi in 1933 and the ensuing debate on the nature of Bharati's poems, resulted in scholars discussing about the literary merits of his compositions. Beyond the explicit nationalist themes of his poetry, works such as Panjali Sabadam, Kannan Pattu, Kuyil, Uzhikuttu, Jnanaradam were discussed by literary critics. Prose writings of Bharati were also published at this time, and also biographies bordering on hagiography were attempted. And also it was during the second phase that scholars started to discuss about the social themes of Bharati's poetry, in particular by Bharatidasan and Jeevanandam. So this is a second stage according to Sivathambi and Marx in the making of a Mahakavi. From there, the third stage, Bharati was still not recognized by certain sections until then, till 1944. You have the Tamil Pandits who kept a distance from Bharati, and also the ideologues of the Dravidian movement who were critical of Bharati for his, Brahmin background. And it was in this stage between 1945 and 1949 that, Bharati had come to be recognized as a Mahakavi or the great poet by all sections of Tamil society, including that of Tamil Pandits and the ideologues of the Dravidian movement. Here, in the third stage, the authors focus on the writings of Vayyapuri Pillai, Tamil scholar Vayyapuri Pillai, and C.N. Annadurai on Bharati. So where they received Bharati, favorably, and for the authors, their recognition completed the circle in the making of Mahakavi. So, this work actually inspired me a lot to look into the reception of Bharati in the progressive tradition. And one of the important observation that Sivathambi and Marx make in this book is that the social and political themes in Bharati's writings were for the first time addressed by the left leaning and communist leaders like Jeevanandam. So therefore, that actually prompted me to look into the writings of these leaders, scholars, and also the magazines of associated, in a broad terms with the cultural left. All right. So, Bharati in progressive literary magazines. As I said, the decade of 1950 was marked by the founding of progressive literary magazines in Tamil, such as Santi, Saraswati, and Thamarai. Bharati had a special place in these magazines, as evidenced by the bold quotation from his poetry on the front editorial page. Invoking Bharati provided legitimacy for the magazines and their new literary interventions in poetry and prose. Literary criticism inspired by a sociological approach to literature started to emerge in these magazines. R.K. Kannan serialized essays on Bharati, Pudumai Pittan in Saraswati is one such example. Bharati in these magazines and the writings of scholars is a reminder of Tamil vitality and linguistic and literary regeneration. Also, Bharati is a signifier of people, nation, than nation state. That is how Bharati comes across in these magazines. Let me now go into the examples I will cite, by showcasing from the magazines itself the kind of coverage that Bharati received. But before that, I will also talk a little bit about the editors of these magazines and their background, right? Um, Let me first start with Santi. As I said, started in December 1954, and the editor of the magazine is Tomusi Ragunathan, 1923 to 2001. Here, I would like to begin with a quote by a Sri Lankan Tamil scholar, Sivathambi, who says in one of the essays in a book called Engal Ragunathan or Our Ragunathan the following. Ragunathan occupies an important place in the growth of modern literary criticism along scientific lines. Unquote. Let me talk a little bit about Ragunathan. Ragunathan, 1923 to 2001, known in the literary circles in Tamil Nadu as Tomusi, is a versatile literary personality who wrote novels, short stories, poetry, literary criticism, intellectual biographies, and translated works from Russian literature into Tamil. One of the representative writers of the cultural left in Tamil Nadu, Ragunathan was associated with Kala Ilakya Perumandram, Tamil Nadu Art Literary Federation, the cultural wing of the Tamil Nadu unit of the Communist Party of India, in various capacities as the founder, member, president, and vice president since the formation of the organization in the early 1960s. Born in the Tamil literary heartland of Tirunelveli, Ragunathan's education at the Hindu college in the town was disrupted due to his participation in the Quit India movement when the colonial state arrested him. He took to journalism, assisting and editing Tamil periodicals from the 1940s such as Dinamani Prasuram, Mullai, Sakti, and Santi. For over 2 decades from the 1960s, Ragunathan was the editor of Soviet Land magazine in Tamil. He authored Panjum Pasiyum, Cotton and Hunger in 1953, the first socialist realist novel in Tamil that portrayed the conditions of the cotton mill workers and their struggles. Ragunathan also translated Maxim Gorky's novel Mother into Tamil as Thai in 1975. More importantly, Ragunathan wrote a series of works of literary criticism and intellectual biographies of foundational figures of modern Tamil literature such as Pudumai Pittan and Subramania Bharati. Inspired by Jeevanandam's speeches on Bharati, Ragunathan studied Bharati's life and intellectual output critically from the early 1960s, resulting in a series of publications such as Bharatiyum Shelliyum in 1964, Gangayum Kaviriyum in 1966, Bharati Sila Parvaigal 1982, Bharati Kalamum Karuthum in 1982 that won him the Sahitya Academy Award, and Panjali Sabadam, Uraiporulum Maraiporulum in 1987. While his initial works on Bharati adopted a comparative approach, that is Opiyal Ilakkiyam, to the study of literature, the later works were based on sociological and historical methods of literary criticism. Influenced by the Marxist method and progressive ideology, writers such as Ragunathan and Kailasapati undertook a novel comparative approach to the study of Tamil literature in the 1960s. Such early studies undertaken by Ragunathan examine the influence of the ideas of English poet Shelley on Bharati's compositions as the poet returned from Banaras at the turn of the 20th century, addressing himself as a Shelley Dasan, disciple of Shelley. In Gangayum Kaviriyum, published in 1966, Ragunathan studied the lives of Tagore and Bharati in a comparative framework, situating the life and compositions of the two great poets of the Indian subcontinent in a historical context. The work emerged from reading Tagore's works and visiting Kolkata to celebrate Tagore's centenary in 1961. Ragunathan delivered talks on Bharati during the anniversaries of the poet's birth and death at Ettayapuram, and some of these talks were expanded and published in book form. So this is insofar as the background of Ragunathan, the editor of Santi, is concerned. Let me go into the magazines. Now, as you can see here, to your left is the first issue of Santi and the editorial, right, from December 1954, titled Santi Malargirathu. Santi is blooming. It carried a quote from Bharati at the top. Namakku Tozhil Kavithai, Nattirkuழைத்தல். Poetry working for the cause of the nation is my occupation. This quote remained on the front editorial page until the magazine's last issue in 1956. Taking pride in the fact that the magazine is being published from Tirunelveli, the land of Bharati, Chidambaram Pillai, and Pudumai Pittan, Santi promised to produce new literature, keeping in mind the ideals and literary achievements of those founding figures of modern Tamil literature and politics. Ragunathan, the editor and publisher of Santi, had recently moved to Tirunelveli after gaining editorial experience working for such literary magazines as Mullai and Sakti in Chennai. In between, influenced by Marxism, he had also transformed into quote unquote progressive writer. In the very first issue, Santi reproduced, to your right, you see that in the very first issue, Santi reproduced the text of the speech of Shanmugam Pillai the Tamil scholar in All India Radio, on Bharati's prose. In an obituary to a journalist and writer Kalki Krishnamurti, Santi acknowledged his role in constructing a memorial for Bharati to support him in Ettayapuram and mobilized resources for Var Ramasamy, the noted scholar of Bharati, to support him. The magazine welcomed the move of the Madras government in 1955 to transfer Bharati's poetical works to the public domain after acquiring the copyright from private individuals a few years ago. So this is the editorial in one of the issues of Santi that welcomed the efforts of the Madras government to acquire the right of Bharati's songs from the private individuals before putting out in the public domain for the people. Now, appreciating Tamil scholars and the public for actively taking up the issue to make Bharati's works public property, the editorial noted that the government's responsibility should not end with this crucial step of transferring the rights of the to the public. It made an appeal to the government to publish Bharati's works in an attractive and accessible manner. The editorial desired that the government must make an effort to identify the unpublished manuscripts and writings of Bharati left out in the earlier editions of Bharati Prasuralayam. Further, the editorial appealed to the publishers and Tamil scholarly community not to violate the public rights, but to act responsibly to ensure that Bharati's works are disseminated for the growth of Tamil language and culture. I think that this is a very important message that Santi was trying to convey to the government as well as to the wider public at large, and more importantly to the Tamil publishing world, to act responsibly when work of a Tamil scholar is being put out in the public domain if the work is nationalized. Now, the message of Santi's editorial assumes significance in today's context when nationalizing the works of Tamil scholars has reached a dead end. Commenting on the effects of nationalization by the government, historian Venkatachalapati, in an opinion column in the Hindu newspaper last year, wrote, following the Tamil Nadu government's decision to nationalize the works of former Chief Minister and Tamil scholar M. Karunanidhi, that while no doubt nationalization has democratized literature and aided genuine scholarly work, the deleterious effect of such an exercise include predatory publishers exploiting the situation without any moral qualms, and that such publishers have preyed on the huge volumes of books released from copyright and dumped them on state-funded public libraries through unscrupulous methods. To quote Venkatachalapati, the works of well-known authors and even classics have been pillaged, their titles ravaged, and authorship changed. So very clearly you see how this whole effort that was made to honor Tamil scholars by nationalizing the works have reached a dead end, to a point where there's so much of abuse happening by the publishers. And in this context, the editorial message of Santi on the eve of Bharati's works being nationalized assumes significance, where Ragunathan as editor appealed to the government, to the Tamil public, and importantly to the Tamil publishers to act responsibly, right? So that such efforts are aimed at developing and enriching the Tamil language and literature. Now, let me move on to the next important feature that I wish to showcase. This I found it really fascinating. In the August 1955 issue of Santi, a lengthy letter from Kamil Zwelabil, a noted Czech Tamil scholar, to Ragunathan was translated and published. The letter offers a fascinating insight into the working culture of Tamil scholarship in Prague and the ongoing and future projects of young Zwelabil, who was then only 28 years old. Titled Czech Nadum Tamilum, Czech nation and Tamil, the letter to Ragunathan dated 15 June 1955 was translated by Thika Sivasankaran, the literary critic associated with the progressive camp. Given the limited availability of Tamil books, Zwelabil writes about his academic background and difficulties in pursuing Tamil language and literature in Prague. One of the few books in Tamil he was able to secure from a Tamilian staff member at the Indian Embassy in Prague was Bharati's Desiya Geethangal. Zwelabil informs us that it was his desire to learn contemporary Tamil literature first, particularly about the life and works of Bharati. After becoming a faculty member at the Oriental Institute of the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague, Zwelabil says he prepared a roadmap listing his future research projects. It is instructive to quote Zwelabil here. I find it fascinating this information because Zwelabil is a well-known scholar of Dravidian studies and Tamil literature, whose writings on the history of Tamil literature continues to be an accessible work in English language for the non-Tamil audience. Zwelabil Zwelabil writes, I quote, as a part of my research plan, I wanted to write an essay on the life and works of Subramania Bharati on a historical basis. Later, I realized that the time was not yet right to write such a work. I still think that I am not yet capable of writing such an essay. It is first necessary to have a critical and comprehensive work on life, particularly the literary works of Bharathiyar. Bharathiyar's complete works have not been put together in an appreciable manner. Currently, I am editing a volume on the prose and poetry of Bharathiyar. This volume may be published in 1957-1958. I plan to write essays on Bharati in the Novi Orient and Tamil culture. I am currently drafting a lengthy critical essay on Bharathiyar's prose writings. Unquote. While the letter goes on to list other Zwelabil's project, it offers an interesting insight into the scholarship on Bharati viewed from the perspective of a Czech Tamil scholar. Now let me go on to the other editorial where Santi talked about the need to celebrate Bharati Day. The editorial calling for celebrating Bharati Day in Santi's September issue deserves a discussion. In 1955, titled Bharati Dinam, Bharati Day, the editorial provides an explanation for the popularity of Bharati's works among the people of Tamil Nadu and the pride sought by the young writers and poets in claiming the lineage of Bharati. Bharati is popular not simply because of the aesthetic and accessible use of Tamil language and poetic imagery, but also because of the message he conveyed in his poems. Bharati grew as part of the Indian national movement and felt the pulse of the movement. He stood on the side of the colonized people who participated in the movement. Bharati represents the progressive tendencies of the freedom struggle. He rebelled against all kinds of oppression inflicted on human beings and welcomed the ideas and movements of freedom, irrespective of the region. His poems and stories were aimed at well-being of human beings in the country. The young writers and poets must realize the legacy of Bharati and fulfill their duty by taking an oath on Bharati Day. Santi also published an interesting snippets of Bharati's quotes. This is a very interesting snippet that I came across of Bharati's quote critiquing the dominant structures in society. One such quote was titled Yar Somberi, who is lazy? Bharati critiques the rich and the powerful for stacking wealth and demand for their reformation. In Santi's annual edition of Andumalar in December 1955, Jeevanandam, the communist leader, wrote on Bharati's communism. Titled Bharathiyin Podu Udamai, Jeeva attempts to address the question of whether Bharati accepted communism or not. Jeeva argues that Bharati evolved into an extremist nationalist in the wake of 1905 revolutions in Europe and Asia. Terming Bharati as a synthetic genius, Jiva presents the influence of various Tamil, Indian, and European influences on Bharati and his ideas. Influenced by the ideas of English poet Shelley, Bharati articulated Republican socialist values in his poetry and prose. For Jiva, Bharati's poem Bharata Samudayam not only endorses the transformation brought by the revolution in Russia, but also establishes communism as the destiny of Indian society of the future. So we find in the pages of Santi these interesting publications where uh, attempts were being made to provide a left interpretation of Bharati, in particular highlighting his social and political message, which until then did not receive enough attention in other platforms. So this is the story of Ragunathan and his magazine Santi from December 1954 to December 1955. There are also few issues of Santi I was unable to access. I have been searching for these magazines. I collected these magazines from different places, from Sri Lanka, universities in Sri Lanka, University of Jaffna, University of Peradeniya, and also from Ettayapuram, Ragunathan Library, and so on. Now let me move to the second important magazines that is the subject of my talk, Saraswati. Just like how we discussed the life of the editor, biographical sketch of the editor of Santi, let me also talk a bit about the biographical sketch of the editor of Saraswati magazine, Vijay Bhaskaran, 1926 to 2011. Vijay Bhaskaran, born in Tirupur to a family of freedom fighters, did his studies at Annamalai University in Chidambaram. He was expelled from the university for his involvement in the student movement. Affiliated to the Communist Party from a young age, Vijay Bhaskaran worked in various newspapers and magazines as assistant editor before starting his own weekly, Vidivelli, in the early 1950s that focused on politics, current affairs, and social issues. Having gained considerable ground in the journalistic field with literary sensibilities, Vijay Bhaskaran decided to launch a magazine devoted exclusively to art and literature. He was conscious not to associate his efforts to form an independent magazine for literature with the Communist Party. It was this broad based democratic approach with sensitivity to autonomy and creativity of individual writers and artists that allowed him to start a literary magazine free from the influence of Communist Party ideology and politics. The choice of naming the magazine as Saraswati was deliberate, as Vijay Bhaskaran was mindful not to give any communist political tone to its name. One of the reasons provided by the founder was that the magazine was named after a press run by Premchand, the doyen of Hindi progressive literature. So let me now go into the issues of Saraswati and how Saraswati covered Bharati. The first issue of Saraswati to your left, you can see May 1955, the editorial, editorial laid out the path of the magazine and the agenda of the magazine. The first issue appeared in May 1955. The front editorial page carried a quote, just like how Santi carried a quote and continued that quote till the last issue. Saraswati also carried a quote of Bharati. Hard-working labor, poet, and the saintly are gods. It continued in subsequent issues of the magazine. The editorial announced its path boldly, invoking Subramania Bharati and Ramasami's views, emphasizing openness and dialogue with the outside world and writing for the cause of social development. The fact that the first issue of the magazine decided to invoke the canonical figures in modern Tamil poetry and prose in the persona of Bharati and Ramasamy respectively signaled Vijay Bhaskaran's sensitivity to modern Tamil literary and cultural foundations. upon which the magazine decided to develop further. The motivation for starting the magazine, according to the editor, printed on the first page titled Namadu Padai, Our Path, ranged from the desire to publish best stories and poetry in Tamil to translating the contemporary literature from elsewhere in the world for Tamil audience. Quoting Ramasami's views that the purpose of writing is to empower society and improve the condition of people, Vijay Bhaskaran made it clear that the mission of Saraswati was to realize these ideals. Saraswati reproduced the essay of Va Ramasamy, Bharati in Kanavu, Bharati's Dream, from Sakti magazine in July 1955 issue, wherein Ramasamy pushes for zealous adoption and writing in Tamil language. Here, Bharati becomes a source of legitimacy and justification for the proposal to Tamil writers. You find that to your right, the essay of Va Ramasamy reproduced from the Sakti magazine in Saraswati in July 1955 issue. Elsewhere, Saraswati reproduced the short stories, essays, and poems of Bharati. The other important publication that came out in Saraswati was a series of essays on literary criticism by the writer R.K. Kannan. Here it is. A series of essays of literary criticism of Bharati's writings by R.K. Kannan of the Communist Party started to appear in September 1955 issue of Saraswati, titled Bharati Nokku, Bharati's Perspective. The first essay attempts to examine perspectives of Indian society and politics emerging from Bharati's poetry. Let me dwell a little more about this piece that R.K. Kannan started to write in Saraswati and continued to write in the subsequent issues also. Later, in the later day, brought together and published a book on Bharati. For Kannan, Bharati accurately depicted the condition of Indian people under colonial rule. Quoting from Tudikindra Nenjam, Suffering Heart, a poem that Bharati composed in 1909, Kannan argues that it captures the condition of the colonized people during the second half of the 19th century. Subservient and fearful, the colonized lacked the rationality to make sense of their own miserable existence, riven with famine and epidemics under colonial rule. Bharati expresses anguish at the condition of the people of India. For Kannan, Bharati did not stop with this expression of despair, but infused a political message in his poems to arouse the consciousness and actions of people. For every historical movement, a theory and philosophy is required. In the Indian context, as a reaction to colonial rule, a strand of idealist philosophy outlined by such figures as Vivekananda, Tilak, and Gandhi emphasized action by creatively engaging with Indian philosophical tradition of Vedanta and Bhagavad Gita. According to Kannan, Bharati's poems echo these sentiments and philosophy. Bharati also emphasized the necessity of action by participating in this wider stream of philosophical renaissance. Quoting from a range of poems on Tilak, Shivaji, and Russia, Kannan demonstrates how Bharati creatively deployed powerful language and imagery to politicize people and prepare them for a struggle against colonial rule. Despite leading a tough personal life in exile and poverty, Bharati exuded confidence and positive outlook in his poetry. Invoking Kali, Parasakti, and Saraswati, he composed several poems on nationalism and patriotism. The philosophical debates in Indian history performed a progressive role in moderating the socio-economic inequalities in different historical ages. Kannan argues that ignoring the philosophical undertone while reading Bharati's poetry is impossible. Unlike the West, where the contradictions between the feudal and the bourgeois elements were acute, in India, due to colonial conditions and the underdevelopment of economy, philosophical ideas were stuck within the idealist tradition of thought. While one stream of idealist thought stressed inaction and fate, the other emphasized the necessity of action. For Kannan, This Advaita Vedantic thought inspired Vivekananda and Gandhi to embark on a societal mission that, albeit limited in scope, stopped short of total transformation. Bharati's canon will have a definite place in the history and literature of modern India, given the vitality of his compositions expressing the sentiments of Indian people. Just like Valluvan, Ilango Adigal, and Kamban fulfilled the compulsions of their respective ages in their poetry, Bharati enriched the Tamil language and literature by producing poetry in tune with the requirements of his age. Kannan concludes his essay with an observation that as long as Tamilians desire freedom, Bharati will remain their comrade. Subsequent issues of Saraswati carried other essays of Kannan on Bharati. I find Kannan's reading of Bharati to be a little different from other leftist reading of Bharati. For example, Jiva, ignored several aspects of Bharati's philosophical compositions, but focused mostly on his social and political message. But whereas Kannan in his R.K. Kannan in his reading of Bharati was also sensitive to the philosophical undertones of Bharati's poetry. So in that sense, the left reading of Bharati is also not homogeneous. There are several readings that exist within this ideological stream, and Kannan, R.K. Kannan's reading of Bharati is one such divergent reading from a largely social and political reading of Bharati by other communist thinkers and leaders like Jeevanandam. Saraswati carried an interesting debate. Now, let me go to the next. This is insofar as the literary criticism is concerned. Saraswati also reproduced Bharati's essay Tamil from Swadesamitran in the October issue of 1955, and also carried an interesting, debate with the Sagitya Academy. Saraswati carried an interesting debate with the Sagitya Academy regarding publication of Bharati's poetry in its August 1959 issue. Intervening in the debate post-nationalization, writer Thomusi Ragunathan critiqued Sagitya Academy for the necessity to bring out an expensive edition of the selected poems of Bharati by R.P. Sethu Pillai. Ragunathan contended that there are several publishers who have brought out Bharati's poems in Tamil Nadu for much cheaper cost with more exhaustive collections than what Sagitya Academy attempted to do. Given that the organization is owned by the government that ran on the public money, Ragunathan questioned the intention and activities of the academy. Equally interesting is the text of speech by Kamil Zwelabil presented at the All India Writers' Conference published in January 1960, issue of Saraswati. Zwelabil presented the efforts of Indologists in his country in translating Indian literature into Czech language. He informs the community of writers that Bharati's poem Bharata Samudayam is a first work of translation from Tamil to Czech language published in 1951. So these are some of the interesting coverage publications related to Bharati in Saraswati. To sum up, before I go to Thamarai briefly, to sum up Santi and Saraswati, Saraswati set out its agenda clear from the beginning: to translate and present to Tamil readers the growing new ideas in the international arena, to preserve and encourage arts and literature of Tamil Nadu, and to give platform to young writers and artists to produce stories and poetry. According to Valli Kannan, Saraswati managed to accomplish these tasks efficiently. The magazine translated short stories from world literature and published abridged translations of novels from abroad. Further, the magazine published original short stories, essays, philosophical writings on culture, science, and poetry. The magazine offered platform for the growth of Jeevanandam, who went on to become one of the leading Indian writers in Tamil language. Writers such as Sundar Ramaswamy, Valli Kannan, and Sri Lankan Tamil writers such as Dominic Jiva, K. Daniel, and Kavalur Rajadurai published stories in Saraswati. The magazine serialized the translation of Tagari Sivasankaran Pillai, his work Thoti in Magan, Scavenger's Son, by Sundar Ramaswamy. in the words of Kannan, Saraswati staked claim for an era in the history of modern literature. It is important to note that Bharati occupied an important position in the pages of Saraswati, providing legitimacy and justification for the magazine's initiatives and experiments. Unlike Saraswati, the duration of Ragunathan's Santi was limited. While the magazine published short stories and translations of Abbas, Mulkraj Anand, Yashpal and others, it offered platform for writers such as Sundar Ramasamy, D. Selvaraj, Srinivasan and others. According to Vallikannan, while Santi managed to earn the progressive label for the magazine, it did not leave any significant impact on the literary world. Nonetheless, it needs to be noted that Ragunathan's early enthusiasm for reading Bharati can be gleaned from the pages of Santi. So let me conclude these two sections and then quickly talk a little bit. I won't talk exhaustively. I will conclude soon of the Thamarai, the literary magazine brought out by the Communist Party of India in Tamil Nadu, edited by Jeevanandam. Born in 1907 in Kanyakumari district, Jeevanandam, hereafter Jeeva, his life spanned 5.5 decades, during which he participated in various political movements, ranging from Congress to the Communist movement in Tamil Nadu. His interest in Tamil literary culture found expression in Tamil poetry he composed from an early age, and later in his exploration of the history of Tamil literature and culture from a Marxist perspective from the 1950s. This engagement with Tamil creative sensibilities and a commitment to communist politics had a powerful impact on his role as a public orator, political and intellectual figure in Tamil Nadu. In late 1958, the Communist Party started publishing Thamarai, a rival progressive literary magazine to Saraswati with Jeeva as the editor. The publication and distribution of Thamarai resulted in Saraswati taking a backseat, for both the magazines were printed in the same Communist Party owned press. Bharati occupied a canonical position in Thamarai, as the magazine brought out special issues in September every year, in which many Tamil scholars and critics contributed essays on the poet. However, more than debating the literary and aesthetic linguistic dimensions of Bharati's poetry, the magazine emphasized the political message in Bharati's writings and the need to practice such politics. Jeeva kept emphasizing such a message tied to communist politics in his editorials and special issues. So let me conclude my talk with the following observation. My talk today showcased the place of Bharati in the progressive literary magazines in Tamil Nadu, Santi, Saraswati and Thamarai to a limited extent. In a broader sense, this is about the story of the cultural left's engagement with Bharati in Tamil Nadu. The left in Tamil Nadu showed enormous enthusiasm for Bharati, largely for his social reformist, democratic and socialist message. That is not to say that there are no critical approaches to Bharati. As I pointed out in the course of my talk, there are critical readings of Bharati, the Periyarist critique of Bharati, and also the critique of Bharati in the Periyarist movement, beginning with the writings of Periyar himself, and also the contemporary Dalit critique of Bharati. So these critiques also need to be taken into consideration and examined in the today's context, where Bharati is also Bharati is also talked about by the Hindu right. It is in this context that we need to also look at the left reception of Bharati, in particular the social and political message that left tried to read in Bharati's composition. Thank you very much. I would like to receive questions if there are any.